welcome to part one of my series where I explain the biological basis of emotion and its impact on our social lives. So part one will be thinking about emotions, or more specifically, the perceptions of emotion. So emotions can be quite complicated to understand. Sometimes it feels like we have no control over them, and then sometimes it feels like we do. In this series, we will be going over some of the biological systems in which we can explain both whether or not we can or can't, and what specific systems serve what kind of function. The main four ideas that I want to go over are the emotional intelligences of the brain. Emotional intelligence is described as the ability to understand one's own emotions and the emotions of others, and how both of those will be affected through interaction. So for this four-branch model, there will be four different areas which we'll be discussing in this series, starting with the ability to perceive emotion, then going on to the use of emotions to facilitate our thinking, then understanding emotions, and finally, the management of emotions. One of the measures of emotional intelligence is the idea of false belief. So false belief is the ability to mentalize the perception of another individual, even if that individual is wrong. So generally for younger children, we test them using the Sally-Ann test to figure out if they are able to develop this idea of mentalizing another person's perspective by using the Sally-Ann test. So in this test, Sally will hide her marble in a box and leave. Anne will then move the marble from the box into a basket. And when Sally returns, where would she look? Would she look in the box or would she look in the basket? And of course, children who do not develop this idea of false belief will believe that since the marble is in the basket, Sally will look in the basket, even though if you were really looking at it from her perspective, she would be looking in the box where she left it last. Another measure of emotional intelligence is the ability to sabotage or deceive others. In another test, children were tested on their ability to sabotage or use deception in a situation where someone was trying to get into a box and receive a reward, and the child had to stop them. So in one scenario, the child had to use sabotage or simply find a lock and lock the box in order to stop people from getting into it, or try to use deception, or essentially lie to the person and claim that the box was already locked so that the person can't get inside it. Three different groups of children were used. The first one was the normal group, or the children that have normal development, the mentally disabled children's group, and the autistic children's group. In the sabotage scenario, all children seemed to be able to understand the concept that locking the box would prevent another person from being able to open it. But when it came to the deception scenario, children with autism had a much harder time understanding the mental state of another individual who's been lied to, or what kind of deceptive tactics were actually more successful in being able to prevent somebody from trying to receive their reward. So one area of the brain that we believe has a lot to do with the idea of mentalizing another person's perception and emotions is in the superior temporal sulcus. This has been called the brain's social river, and is known for being able to recognize biological emotion, as well as the recognition of goal-oriented behavior, or behavior that is meant to serve a purpose. And it is also known to be able to distinguish between who is actually trying to accomplish that goal, or who is actually doing the biological emotion. So the lower regions of the superior temporal sulcus can recognize purposeful movement or biological movement, and the higher regions of the STS can actually distinguish between the sights and sounds of other people and oneself. So another area of the brain we believe is important in being able to perceive another person's mental state is the temporoparietal junction. This area of the brain is known to be involved in inferring intention behind biological movement, identifying if the movement is from the self or from other people, and distinguishing the social intentions of the self and others. So essentially knowing whose goal is being met in a particular situation. And as we can see here with some brain studies or some brain scans that have been done in a meta-analysis, we see that a lot of areas or a lot of activity that happens in the temporal parietal junction involve goal-oriented movement, theory of mind, or the ability to understand the emotions of others or understand the goals and agency of others. And of course, this area is also involved in recognizing traits of others. And so here we see that there is an actual system involved in the perception of other people or other people's intents. So first, in the superior temporal sulcus, we see that this area is involved with the visual input and audio input of biological agents, or just being able to tell if somebody is moving or if somebody is around and doing something. And then the temporal parietal junction serves to identify movement of whether or not it's of the self or others. And then the premotor cortex uses these signals to perceive whether or not the actions of are have the goal of yourself, so your goal, or whether or not it's the goal of somebody else. And those signal back to the temporal parietal junction to identify the intent, what kind of intent is behind the action, and then of course back to the sulcus where it identifies who was responsible for it. And of course, how well all these three areas function in a situation will determine how well you can actually mentalize another person's intent or mentalize another person's actions. And mirror neurons also serve to be able to sort of use the information being processed into a way of being able to map out your own sort of movement. So if you see a movement of another person, you can also map it out with your own biological ability. But we do see that when it comes to the perception of emotion, there is a pretty specific system of the brain involved in being able to mentalize another person's movement, their intentions, and even their emotions. And so that is part one of this series. Part two, we will be going into how to use emotions to facilitate thinking.